Boone Carter's truck rattled along the cracked dirt road, each bump echoing in the stillness of the early morning. The rising sun painted the rolling hills in gold, brushing light over the oak trees whose gnarled branches twisted like ancient hands reaching skyward. Dust rose from the tires and hung in the air, a thin veil over the wide, empty landscape. When he finally reached the ranch, the sight of the weathered fence posts leaning slightly under decades of wind and rain filled him with a quiet, almost sacred satisfaction. This was exactly the kind of solitude he had craved, far from the chaos and judgment of the town he had left behind. He stepped out of the truck, boots crunching against the parched earth, and took a slow breath of the crisp, clean air. The smell of sun-baked soil and dry grass settled into his lungs, and, for a moment, he closed his eyes and let the quiet wrap around him like a heavy blanket. This was his escape, a place where he could rebuild himself in peace, or so he hoped. The cabin ahead, small and sturdy, had a sagging porch and peeling paint, but to Boone it radiated the promise of a new beginning. He dropped the last of his bags by the door and ran a hand over the rough wood of the porch railing. He could feel the texture beneath his fingertips, the grooves and splinters telling stories of countless years under sun, wind, and rain. Here the weight of expectation didn't exist. No neighbors to judge him, no familiar faces to remind him of mistakes he'd spent years trying to bury. Solitude had always been his refuge, and now it was real, unbroken and entirely his own. But as he began stacking firewood near the cabin, the faint sound of movement among the trees drew his attention, a rustle, subtle but unmistakable, like the brush of fur against dry leaves. He froze, squinting toward the shadows of the distant woods. Nothing emerged at first, just the wind teasing the branches. But then, for a heartbeat, a fleeting shadow darted between two oaks. Too small to be a man, too deliberate to be a deer. Boone's hand instinctively moved toward his pocket, brushing against the cold metal of his knife, though he didn't pull it. His pulse quickened, a small silent alarm that echoed in his chest. He walked slowly toward the edge of the porch, eyes scanning the tree line. There was no mistaking the tracks pressed into the soft earth near the cabin. Bare, small, almost impossibly precise, like the footprints of a child who had spent more time running through forests than walking on streets. The footprints ended abruptly near the well, as though whoever or whatever had left them had vanished into thin air. A chill crawled up Boone's spine, despite the warmth of the morning sun. The relief he had felt at the prospect of isolation now wrestled with a creeping unease. He wasn't completely alone here, that much was certain, and the wilderness around him held secrets he didn't yet understand. Still, as he set the axe into the woodpile and adjusted his pack, a small, stubborn part of him smiled. This was exactly what he had come for: space, silence, and the raw challenge of living on his own terms. Whatever waited in the shadows, he would meet it on his own, as he always had. Boone stepped back onto the porch, surveying the wide, empty horizon. The oak trees swayed gently in the morning breeze, their leaves whispering secrets he could almost hear. Somewhere in the distance a crow called, sharp and solitary, breaking the calm. The day had begun, and with it the first true taste of freedom, and the first brush with a mystery he had not yet named. Something lived in these hills besides him, something that moved with intent, and Boone, despite every instinct screaming caution, felt an undeniable flicker of curiosity. Boone had been stacking firewood for what felt like hours, the rhythm of chopping and placing logs a balm against the tension lingering in his chest. The cabin seemed to sigh under the weight of its own age, every creak in the floorboards and groan of the rafters whispering stories he could almost feel pressing against his skin. He paused to wipe the sweat from his brow, glancing toward the tree line that bordered the rolling hills. Something or someone was out there, moving just beyond the edges of perception, a presence that was both fleeting and deliberate. A branch snapped sharply in the distance, and Boone froze mid-motion. His eyes darted through the morning mist, catching the briefest glimmer of motion, a dark shape sliding between the shadows like a wisp of smoke. Not a deer, not a coyote. It moved with an elegance and control that unsettled him. He gripped the handle of his axe tighter, knuckles white, yet he didn't advance. He had lived enough of his life surrounded by danger to know that rushing in often worsened the situation. Silence, patience, these were his weapons now. The tracks at the edge of his porch drew his gaze again. They were unmistakably human, small and narrow, yet the imprints carried a peculiar precision, as if the feet that had pressed into the dirt were accustomed to stealth, to moving without leaving a trace. His pulse quickened. These weren't ordinary trespassers. This was someone who belonged to the wild. Someone who could vanish without warning. He leaned against the porch railing, listening. A low, almost inaudible rustle came from the tall grass near the old corral. It wasn't constant. It came and went, like the breathing of something alive, aware of him. Boone's mind raced, recalling every story he had heard growing up in these parts. Tales of hermits, of children raised in the woods, of creatures whose very existence blurred the line between human and animal. He had always dismissed them as folklore. Now, standing in the golden light of dawn, he wasn't so sure. The wind shifted, carrying a faint scent that made his stomach tighten. Earth, dry grass, and something else. Something faintly metallic, like old blood, lingering in the underbrush. He sniffed the air instinctively, then stiffened. Movement again, quicker this time, a shadow sliding along the edge of the trees, a figure crouched low, almost predatory. Boone's instincts screamed at him to hide, to retreat, yet fascination rooted him to the spot. Whoever or whatever was out there was intelligent, calculating, watching. He stepped down from the porch, boots crunching softly against the dry earth. Every nerve in his body screamed caution, yet he moved slowly, deliberately toward the source of the disturbance. As he neared the corral, the hairs along his neck bristled. The faint sound of twigs snapping under careful pressure reached him, and then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. Just the stillness of the hills and the whisper of wind through the oaks remained. Boone exhaled slowly, heart pounding. Relief mixed uneasily with the growing sense of danger. He had sought solitude, yes, but now the isolation carried a weight he hadn't anticipated. A living, breathing enigma out there in the wilderness, testing boundaries he hadn't yet realized existed. He glanced back at the cabin, the well, the stacked firewood, and a shiver ran down his spine. In the quiet of this sprawling landscape, he had expected to find only peace. Instead, he had found eyes watching him from the shadows, intelligence and intent behind them, and a question he wasn't sure he wanted answered. How alone could a man truly be, when the wild itself seemed alive with secrets? As the sun climbed higher, Boone tightened his jacket against the chill, scanning the tree line one last time before retreating inside. Something had shifted in the air, a tension that didn't belong to the wind or the trees. It belonged to someone or something that had been waiting for him, just as curious, just as wary as he had been of it. And for the first time since leaving the town he'd abandoned, Boone realized that this ranch, this so-called refuge, was about to become far more dangerous, far more alive than he had ever imagined. Boone had barely slept that night. The wind whispered through the cracks in the cabin walls, carrying faint, unplaceable scents from the woods beyond. The moon hung low, pale and watchful, illuminating the rolling hills with a ghostly silver glow. Every rustle of the leaves, every distant snap of a twig made him stiffen, heart thudding like a trapped bird. He told himself it was nothing, just the ranch settling, just the night wildlife, but deep down he knew better. Something was out there, alive, intelligent, and aware of him. At first light, he stepped outside, boots sinking slightly into the frost-hardened earth. His eyes scanned the tree line, searching for the source of the disturbance. The morning mist clung stubbornly to the ground, curling around fence posts and the gnarled roots of oak trees like fingers. Then he saw it, movement. A shadow darted between the trees, impossibly fast and low to the ground. His pulse jumped. It wasn't a deer, no animal moved like that, and certainly not human. He froze, remembering the footprints near his well. They had returned overnight, smaller, more precise than before, carved into the soft earth with an almost deliberate pattern. Boone squatted down, tracing them lightly with a gloved hand. The impressions were bare, narrow, and slightly clawed at the edges, as if whoever, or whatever, had left them had adapted to the wild completely. His breath caught. The girl wasn't just living out here. She was thriving in the forest, moving through it as if it were part of her body. The rustle came again, this time closer, and he caught the faint glimmer of dark hair tangled with the morning dew. He straightened slowly, eyes narrowing, and stepped toward the clearing near the old corral. The shadow froze, crouched behind a boulder, too deliberate to be accidental. He could feel her watching him, the weight of her gaze heavy and sharp like a predator sizing him up. "Easy there," he called softly, trying to steady his voice. "I'm not going to hurt you." The figure tilted her head at the sound, the movement graceful, almost feline. A faint hum, or was it a growl? escaped her throat, vibrating through the crisp air. Boone's stomach tightened. She was human, but not entirely so. The way she moved, the alertness in her eyes. It spoke of a life untethered by the rules of towns or townsfolk. She wasn't a child lost. She was something else, shaped by the wilderness itself. Time seemed to slow. He studied her as she crouched low, back pressed against the boulder, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. His gaze drifted over her frame, lean, scarred in places that told of a harsh existence, clothes tattered and mismatched, hair tangled into wild locks. There was a ferocity in her posture that made him realize she wasn't afraid of the forest. She was the forest. He lowered his hand slowly, placing it against the railing of the corral. "I've got food," he murmured. "Water too. You don't have to be afraid." She didn't move, but the slight tilt of her head suggested comprehension. Then abruptly a sound came from the woods, soft, wet, deliberate footfalls that didn't match his own. Her body tensed, and Boone realized she wasn't just wary of him. Something or someone was behind her, unseen. Her eyes flicked to the shadows, and for a heartbeat he caught raw fear there. Not the fear of a stranger, but recognition of a predator she had known before. The moment shattered with a sudden, eerie howl, low and guttural, echoing from deep within the tree line. Wolves. He could just make out their shapes moving, sleek and gray, their eyes catching the early sun in fleeting glints of amber. The girl reacted instantly, crouching lower, muscles coiled for flight or fight. Boone's hand went to the rifle by his side, but he hesitated. He couldn't risk scaring her. She was wild but intelligent. One wrong move and he might never see her again. Then she did something unexpected. She stepped forward ever so slightly, toward a small pile of dried meat he had placed near the boulder earlier. She sniffed it, slow and methodical, before tearing into it with precision. Her movements fluid, almost unnatural. Every bite revealed more about her life, teeth sharp, strong, honed for survival. Boone watched silently, awe and dread curling together inside him. This was a being forged by the wilderness, raised among predators. And yet, he sensed it, still holding on to some fragile thread of humanity. As the sun rose higher, illuminating the clearing, he realized he was no longer alone in this land he had claimed as sanctuary. Someone or something shared it with him now, and the moment hung heavy in the air, a fragile truce between human and wild, between curiosity and fear. Whatever had wandered into his life, he knew one thing: the forest had its secrets, and they were far deeper and far darker than he could yet imagine. The following days passed in a strange rhythm of vigilance and quiet observation. Boone moved through the ranch as though he were navigating an invisible boundary, aware now that someone, or something, shared this land with him. The girl was never far, yet she remained just beyond reach, a shadow at the edge of the woods, slipping between the oaks and brush like a wraith born of the forest itself. Every morning he would find her traces, footprints pressed carefully into soft soil, small scraps of food gone from the porch, and once, crude markings etched into the bark of the oldest oak near the cabin. Symbols perhaps, or a language he could not yet read. He tried calling out gentle, soft words meant to reassure. "I've got water. I've got meat. You don't have to be afraid." His voice carried across the clearing, floating into the mist like a fragile bridge between worlds. The girl responded only with a tilt of her head, a slight hum from deep in her throat, vibrating in a way that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. She was human, undeniably, but shaped by something wild, something elemental. Her eyes, dark and piercing, reflected intelligence and instinct in equal measure, a mixture that unsettled and fascinated him. Boone began leaving small offerings: dried meat, a bowl of fresh water, a blanket folded neatly by the boulder. Each day he observed her cautiously, keeping his distance, watching how she approached these gifts. She crept forward on hands and feet, a crouched, fluid motion that spoke of years spent moving silently through forests. Her fingers, long and sharp, clawed at the meat with precise strength, and every movement was controlled, deliberate, efficient. Boone could feel the forest's heartbeat through her, the connection she had with something beyond his understanding. One afternoon, as he repaired a section of the weathered fence along the corral, he sensed her presence closer than ever before. A flicker of movement caught the corner of his eye, and when he glanced up, she was crouched behind a boulder not 20 feet away. Their eyes met, and he could feel the depth in hers: curiosity, caution, and something darker, a wariness born of a history he did not yet know. He spoke softly without looking at her. "You're welcome to come closer. I've got fresh water. Food if you need it." Her head tilted again, that same gesture he had seen from the first moment, intelligent and calculated. For long minutes she did not move, as though weighing the decision between trust and instinct. Then, with a grace that made his breath catch, she crept closer, sliding along the ground with a low, coiled readiness that suggested a predator. When she reached the meat, she sniffed it thoroughly, then began tearing into it with a ferocity that belied her youth. As she ate, Boone's gaze roamed over her for details he had missed before. Scars crisscrossed her arms and legs, old wounds telling of a life shaped by struggle and danger. Her fingernails were long and sharp, more like claws than human nails, hinting at years of self-reliance and adaptation to a harsh environment. Yet despite her wildness, her eyes held a fragile humanity, a silent plea for connection that pulled at him in ways he hadn't anticipated. A sudden noise shattered the fragile calm, the distant pounding of hooves echoing across the hills. Both of them froze. Her body stiffened instantly, ears and eyes flicking toward the tree line. Boone caught the change in her expression, the fleeting recognition of danger, and his heart sank. She knew them. Whoever was approaching carried the weight of threat, and whatever history existed between them was far from benign. Before he could react, she vanished, melting into the forest with the ghost-like speed he had begun to expect from her. In the silence she left behind, Boone stood rooted, hand on the fence, mind racing. The world he had sought as sanctuary was no longer a haven. It was a stage for a story far larger and darker than he had imagined, one where the line between human and wild was already blurring before his eyes. And he knew, with a clarity that both thrilled and terrified him, that whatever was coming, whatever history she carried, would demand everything he had learned about survival, trust, and courage. The sun had climbed high when the first unmistakable sound reached Boone, the rhythmic pounding of hooves, steady and deliberate, carrying across the wide valley like a warning bell. He froze mid-step, hammer in hand, the sudden awareness of intruders making his blood thrum with unease. The clearing was quiet now, too quiet, but the shadows at the edge of the woods betrayed subtle motion. Something or someone was moving with intent, not wandering, not exploring. He had felt the presence of the girl in the hills before, but this was different, calculated, human. From the crest of the nearest hill, 3 silhouettes appeared against the blinding sunlight, their shapes sharp and confident. The lead rider dismounted, boots crunching against the dry earth, and tipped his hat in a gesture that carried the casual authority of a man accustomed to command. Boone's hand instinctively moved toward the rifle mounted beside the porch, but he kept it low, hiding the sudden tremor of tension that ran through his body. "Name's Maddox," the man called, his voice carrying across the clearing, calm yet edged with menace. His gray hair caught the light, and his eyes were like shards of steel, precise and unrelenting. Behind him rode 2 younger men, wiry and alert, their hands resting lightly on rifles slung across their saddles, faces hard as stone. Boone felt a chill crawl up his spine. These were not men to be reasoned with. "Tracking something dangerous through these parts," Maddox continued, the words slow, deliberate, almost mocking. "A wild girl. Living with wolves. Killing livestock, terrorizing folks for miles. Some say she ain't fully human no more. We aim to put an end to that problem." Boone's jaw tightened. He knew better than to lie in the face of men like this. But he had no intention of giving them the girl's trail. "Haven't seen any wild girl," he said evenly. "Just moved in here myself a week ago." Maddox's eyes narrowed, scanning his face with a predator's precision. "Funny thing about tracks," he said, gesturing toward the ground near Boone's water well. "They don't lie like people do." The smaller prints embedded in the dirt were unmistakable, and Boone's stomach clenched. The girl's trail had led straight here to his sanctuary. "Maybe she's already moved on," one of Maddox's men muttered, unease lacing his voice. "Shut up, Pike," Maddox snapped without looking away. "She's here. I can smell the fear on this one." His gaze locked on Boone, hand now resting openly on his holster. "See, Mr. Carter, this girl ain't some lost child you can save with kindness." Boone's heart hammered in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. "You won't find her here. She doesn't belong to anyone." The tension coiled in the clearing like a living thing. Maddox stepped closer to the fence, his boots kicking up dust. The younger men shifted slightly, prepared for movement, for resistance. Boone knew that one wrong step could spark violence the moment the girl reappeared. And then she did. He caught the flicker of movement behind the corral, crouched low and watching, her eyes wide, intelligent, and utterly wild. Her gaze met his for a heartbeat, and something passed between them, a warning, a plea, and a silent acknowledgement of the danger closing in. Boone realized she recognized these men, and the memory in her eyes sent an icy shiver down his spine. Fear alone did not account for it. Recognition did. History. A past filled with threat and perhaps violence that Boone had not yet imagined. The wolves, sensing the threat before he could fully grasp it, howled from deep in the tree line, a haunting, low chorus that rattled the edges of the valley. Maddox paused, unease flickering across his features, but he did not relent. "I said she's here," he growled, and the word carried the weight of inevitable confrontation. Boone tightened his grip on the fence rail, heart pounding, and felt the first true taste of the storm to come. He was no longer merely a man seeking solitude. He had become a protector, a participant in a deadly game he had never wanted to play, and somewhere, hidden in the shadows, the girl was watching, waiting, ready to vanish or strike, at the precise moment her survival demanded it. The air itself seemed to quiver with tension. Sunlight, dust, and the scent of the forest mingled with fear and anticipation. Boone knew one thing with certainty. The quiet life he had envisioned was gone, and the rules of this land were about to be rewritten by creatures both human and wild. The forest was alive in a way Boone had never truly felt before. Each step he took along the narrow, hidden trail made the needles of pine crunch beneath his boots, a soft percussion that seemed deafening in the tense quiet. The morning fog clung to the branches, drifting in pale swirls like smoke over the forest floor. Every instinct in his body screamed caution. The girl was near, and so were the predators she had been born alongside. Wolves padded silently around him, glimpses of gray fur and glowing amber eyes flicking between trees, moving as if the shadows themselves had taken shape. He followed her trail carefully, reading the signs she had left, the subtle indentation of fingers on a low branch, a disturbed patch of moss, the faintest scratch marks on tree bark. She had led him here, yet he knew the forest was her domain, not his. He felt the weight of her awareness behind every movement, the way she had watched him from a distance, testing his patience and resolve. Somewhere ahead, he could almost sense her heartbeat echoing in rhythm with the forest, a pulse that matched the subtle tremor of wind through the oaks. Then a sound broke the tense rhythm, a soft rustle in the underbrush, deliberate and cautious. Boone froze, pressing himself against a tree. A shadow slid across the fog, low to the ground, crouched fluid, almost more thought than motion. His breath caught. There she was, the girl emerging from the mist, muscles coiled like a spring ready to strike, eyes gleaming with fierce intelligence. She moved closer, sniffing the air, calculating every step, yet she did not run. Not yet. Boone swallowed, lowering his rifle. This was no ordinary girl. She was an extension of the wild itself. Her agility was inhuman, her awareness uncanny, and the scars crisscrossing her arms and legs told a story of survival against unimaginable odds. Her fingernails, long and sharp, dug into the earth as she shifted her weight with grace, each movement precise and deliberate. Wolves flanked her silently, their presence both protective and intimidating. "She's not running," Boone murmured to himself, heart hammering. "Not from me." The girl's gaze flicked toward him, sharp, assessing. For a moment, time seemed to slow. He could see the fear and trust coiled together in her expression. An instinct honed over years of survival, a life lived beyond the edges of human society. Slowly he stepped forward, hands open, careful not to startle her. "I won't hurt you," he said. "I'm not here to capture or chase you." Her eyes never left his, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, almost imperceptibly, she allowed herself to relax, crouching a fraction lower, sniffing at the air, tasting the scent of him. The wolves shifted slightly, growls vibrating in their throats, warning him silently she was still in charge. And he was intruding in her world. The sudden snap of a branch, louder than anything else, broke the fragile calm. Boone's head snapped toward the sound. Maddox and his men were coming, closing the distance through the trees with lethal intent. He caught the girl's reaction immediately, her body coiled, tense, ready to vanish at a moment's notice. But this time she didn't run, not yet. Her recognition of the threat, her calculated pause, told Boone something he hadn't fully grasped before. She was more than human, but not beyond choice. She darted between the trees with a speed and precision that defied comprehension, leaping over roots, sliding down slopes, almost blending into the forest itself. Wolves flanked her, a living, breathing wall of gray and amber. Boone followed as best he could, moving carefully, his lungs burning, his mind racing. Every instinct told him to protect her, but he realized he was witnessing something far greater than mere survival. He was witnessing mastery of the wild. Intelligence and instinct fused into a singular, unstoppable force, and then, at the edge of a sun-dappled clearing, she stopped. Her eyes met his again, fierce and unyielding. In that moment, Boone understood the truth. She was a creature forged by the wilderness, trained by predators, tempered by fear and necessity. She wasn't just escaping. She was planning, assessing, and waiting for the right moment to strike if needed. And he, standing there with the forest whispering around him, knew that when the final confrontation came, neither human rules nor ordinary strength would determine the outcome. The forest shifted again, shadows deepening as Maddox's men closed in, but the girl's presence dominated the clearing, commanding it without a word. Boone felt an adrenaline surge unlike anything he had ever known. He wasn't just protecting her anymore. He was standing alongside a force of nature, facing a threat that would test every ounce of courage, cunning, and humanity he had left. The hunt had begun, and the forest, alive and watching, would bear witness to the reckoning. The air was thick with tension as Boone crouched behind a fallen log, the smell of pine and earth mixing with the faint metallic tang of blood from the livestock Maddox had mentioned. The forest seemed to press inward, closing the distance between predator and prey, and every rustle of leaves set his nerves on edge. Somewhere ahead the girl waited, or rather watched, her presence so intertwined with the shadows and fog that she was almost invisible, a part of the wild itself. Her eyes glimmered, intelligent and feral, tracking every movement of the approaching men. Maddox's voice cut through the tension, casual but venomous, carrying across the clearing. "I said she's here. Don't lie to me, Carter." The younger men fidgeted nervously, rifles ready, scanning the trees as though the slightest movement could betray her. But Maddox didn't wait. He stepped forward, confidence radiating in every deliberate motion. He had no patience for whispers of legend or wilderness-born girls. He believed in control, in dominance, in brute force. Then a shadow flickered behind him, and Maddox's confident smile faltered. The girl moved faster than the eye could follow. Emerging from the mist like a wraith, she leaped down from an oak, landing silently with claws, hands sharpened by survival, digging into the earth. Wolves flanked her, silent and massive, eyes gleaming amber, growls vibrating low and steady. Maddox froze, a bead of sweat slipping down his temple. Boone's breath caught in his throat as he watched her in motion. She wasn't just fast, she was calculated, each movement precise and intentional, an orchestrated dance with death. Her hands dug into Maddox's lead man's shoulder as he lunged, twisting him to the ground with inhuman strength. The other man stumbled backward, tripping over roots, only to have the girl's shadow appear at his side before he could react. "Boone," she hissed, voice low, guttural, something between a whisper and a growl, and he realized she was communicating, commanding, guiding him through her language of instinct. He nodded slightly, understanding. It was a signal. This was her domain, her rules. He could help, but only if he followed her lead. The confrontation escalated in a blur of motion. Maddox drew his gun, but the girl was already gone, disappearing behind a thick tangle of oaks. Wolves surged forward, teeth bared, eyes like burning coals. Maddox fired blindly, bullets tearing into bark and earth, missing her by inches. She returned with a precision that was terrifying, disarming the smaller men with a swipe of her claws, a twist of their limbs, leaving them sprawled in the dirt, gasping. Maddox barked orders, but the forest had already become her ally. Branches bent and whipped like living things, roots tripping the men, the fog masking every move she made. Boone moved closer, rifle raised, keeping low, but careful not to break her rhythm. He saw the scars on her arms flare with tension, each one a story of survival, each one fueling the raw power she wielded now. She was not a victim. She was a force of nature shaped by wolves, sharpened by fear, and tempered by a wild intelligence that no man could outmatch. Then, in a single fluid motion, she leapt onto Maddox's back, twisting him down with a strength that made him cry out in surprise and rage. The wolves circled, teeth bared, growls rising in a symphony of warning and protection. Maddox scrambled, trying to pull free, but she held him in a grip that was both human and something beyond it. Unyielding, commanding, primal. Boone lowered his rifle slowly, awe and disbelief mixing with relief. The girl's eyes met his, and in that instant, he understood. She had survived because she had embraced the wild within her, because she had learned to trust instinct, intelligence, and the pack that had raised her. She was both human and beyond, a bridge between worlds, untouchable by fear, untouchable by violence, untouchable by men who believed power came from guns and muscle alone. Maddox finally stopped struggling, beaten not just by strength but by cunning, by strategy, by a life lived outside the rules of towns and fences. He spat the dirt from his mouth, his eyes wide with disbelief. What is she?" Boone stepped forward, voice steady. "She's exactly who she is. And she's done running from the world you think you control." The girl released Maddox, disappearing into the mist and trees once more, wolves at her side, leaving him and the others trembling in the clearing. Boone watched as she vanished, every sense alive with admiration and fear. She was free, untamed, and utterly formidable, and he realized he didn't want to tame her, or the wilderness she embodied. For the first time since he had arrived at the ranch, Boone felt a deep, unshakable clarity. Solitude had brought him peace, yes, but it had also brought him purpose. He was no longer merely a man trying to escape his past. He was a witness, a guardian, and perhaps, in some small way, a part of something greater than he had ever imagined. The forest seemed to exhale around him, carrying the echoes of the wolves' howls and the girl's fierce, intelligent presence. Boone Carter's life had changed irrevocably, and the ranch, once a refuge, had become a frontier, a stage for the extraordinary, where human and wild coexisted in a delicate, dangerous, and powerful balance. And somewhere, just beyond the edge of his vision, the girl watched, waiting, always watching, a living testament to the untamed heart of the world he had stumbled into, and the secrets it still held.